Okay, last week we spoke about the different opinions about beginning of night, end of day, beginning of day, end of night, and we mentioned that according to the Gaonim, the sun goes around the earth at night, and according to Rabbeinu Tam, the sun goes behind the dome. And then the sun goes behind the dome, so therefore there are two shkios. There are two sunsets. One is when the sun starts going outwards, which is our sunset, which according to Rabbeinu Tam has no halachic significance. And the other is the time when the sun starts going up around the back of the dome. The second sunset, which is about 58 and a half minutes after the first sunset, and that is the significant sunset in terms of the beginning of nighttime. So that's why Hasidim, specifically Hungarian Hasidim, daven mincha up to an hour, 58.5 minutes, an hour, they round it off, after our shkia, because that's their shkia. Okay? Now, the Rabbi Yosef in his tshuva in Chavdas Chelik Zayin Siman Nun Vav says, and this is true, Das Rova Rishon Kedas Rabbeinu Tam. Most Rishonim have like Rabbeinu Tam, that the first shkia is insignificant, that the second shkia is the primary one, right? And therefore, and the Shulchan Aruch seems to pass in the same way, right? And however, on the other hand, the minhag of Eretz Yisrael was never like Rabbeinu Tam, right? And it sounds like even before the Shulchan Aruch paskin like Rabbeinu Tam, that the first shkia is an hour after sunset, and the second shkia is at 72 minutes or so after sunset, depending on how long a meal is, 72, 90, 96. But the minhag in Eretz Yisrael seems to have been prior already to the Mechaber, to keep the time of the Gaonim. And so the Halacha, he brings down, that it's very proper to be concerned with the opinion of Rabbeinu Tam, and to be machmir when Shabbos goes out, not to do malacha until, which 72 minutes theoretically, but actually it varies by time of year. 72 minutes shows manios, meaning depending on the length of the day, the 72 minutes will be longer. And that means that in summertime in Eretz Yisrael, Tzeitzach Kochavim will be according to Rabbeinu Tam around 90 minutes after our sunset. Okay, as I mentioned last week, to me it seems that the reason why Rabbeinu Tam's opinion became very, very prevalent is because in the northern countries, which were distant from more distant from the equator, in Eretz Yisrael, so twilight lasts a very long time, and sometimes it lasts so long that it never becomes fully dark at night because the sun doesn't go up beneath the horizon. So now there's a very interesting thing here, which is, and Rav Ovadia says that his conclusion is really the time Shabbos is over in most cities in Eretz Yisrael is 20 minutes after Shkia, which is much, much quicker than a Chutz La'aretz. And Machmirim add up to a half an hour after Shkia, which again is half an hour after Shkia. The Chutz, we're not even contemplating ending Shabbos. But it's for every Yirei Shamayim, it's appropriate for him to wait 72 minutes if possible. Now this brings up a fascinating concept, which is 30 years ago, I was talking in the presence of some great rabbi, illustrious rabbi, and I said, Rabbeinu Tam is obviously wrong. And he got very upset at me, because he said, we don't say by Rabbeinu Tam that he's wrong. But he is wrong, right? Because there is no dome. The sun doesn't go up behind the dome at night, right? So what do you mean Rabbeinu Tam is not wrong? So there's one way of looking at it, which is to say that, well, the 3-star, Rabbeinu Tam might have made a mistake about the Rabbeinu Tam, but he's right that the 3 stars only appear after 72 minutes. But the problem is that they appear much earlier. After 72 minutes, you can see the difference between 5th magnitude stars and 6th magnitude stars, which anyway, you really need a telescope in order to see. So therefore, the 3 stars are much earlier, so Rabbeinu Tam doesn't seem to be right on that count either. So it's not true in terms of a dome. It's not true in terms of 3 stars. Why do we have to take Rabbeinu Tam? Why should the poskim say, and many poskim say that we do take Rabbeinu Tam into account. Many poskim once upon a time poskim lechatchila, that this is what to do. And so even today, many poskim say 3 machmir like Rabbeinu Tam. Yes.
For 3 stars, are we talking about in Eretz Yisrael?
Yeah, even in Chutz La'aretz, it happens between much earlier than the 72 minutes. Around 30 minutes after Shkia. In Eretz Yisrael, 20 minutes. In Chutz La'aretz, it's a little bit more than 30 to 33, 30 or so maximum. Okay? So in Eretz Yisrael, the earliest minhag from Motzei Shabbos is 36 minutes. A prevalent minhag is 42 minutes. Outside New York area, usually it's 45 minutes, and New York area, the custom is usually 50 minutes. It's then, of course, is 72. So in order to understand this, we have to understand a very fundamental issue which underlies halacha, which is that halacha is independent of reality. Now, this is an important principle because it underlies much and much of halacha, and the famous example is the question of whether you're allowed to kill lice on Shabbos. The Gemara says, in Masechah Shabbos, you can kill lice on Shabbos. Why can you kill lice on Shabbos? Because they reproduce asexually. They don't reproduce sexually. They reproduce by spontaneous generation. Now, this is not true. Lice do reproduce by sexual reproduction. So the question is now, okay, but Chazal's halacha is based on assumption that they don't. So what happens to this halacha? What do we do with it? So there are three possibilities. One of them is that we have to be machmir, to kill, not to kill lice, because we know that Chazal made a mistake. The other is to say that Chazal don't make mistakes, that they didn't mean literally doesn't reproduce sexually, but since you really can't see it unless it's under a microscope, so therefore, according to the naked eye perspective, lice look like they spontaneously generate and not like they reproduce, so therefore the halacha is that you can't kill them. You can't kill them, sorry. The third possibility is that it's probably quite possible Chazal made a mistake.
Wait,
but so, in science. But so what? The halacha is like Chazal say the halacha is regardless of whether they were right or wrong based on the science. Now, as you probably can guess, my favorite approach, the Beckhofer approach, is of course the third possibility. The first possibility was taken by Yitzhak Lamparnati. Yitzhak Lamparnati was a 18th century Italian achron, and he said that now they invented the microscope, and we know that lice produce sexually, so therefore now it's forbidden to kill lice on Shabbos. So I once was talking about this with one of the Gedolei Torah of the previous generation, Rabbeinu Tam, and he said to me that he were alive at the time of Rabbi Yitzchak Lamparnati, he would have excommunicated him. He would have put him in a cherem, because you can't say that Chazal made a mistake and therefore we should be more machmir than Chazal. Can't say you're more machmir than Chazal. So that was his approach, that the Rabbi Yitzchak's approach, that if we find that they made a mistake, then we have to act accordingly and be more machmir. Conversely, perhaps we can be more makel if we find they made a mistake l'chumrah. We can be more lenient and not go by Chazal's mistaken scientific perspective. The final approach, as I said, the Beckhofer approach, is that it doesn't matter. When you come up to Shemaim, you should kill all the lice you can. And after 120 years, you come to Shemaim and they say, hey, why'd you kill all those lice? And he's on Shabbos, obviously. So he said, because the Gemara says you have to kill lice on Shabbos. The Halacha says you have to kill lice on Shabbos. So what about the fact that they reproduce sexually, and that the Halacha seems to be based on the assumption that they do not? It doesn't matter. Once the Halacha is codified as Halacha, it doesn't matter how the Halacha got there. It's like any other legal code, in that the legal code exists on its own after it is legislated. Yes?
What is the Beckhofer issue with the second approach?
What? The second approach means that you have to assume that Chazal knew science, and that they were just expressing it this way because because by the naked eye, it doesn't seem that way. In other words, they knew that really lice produce sexually. But they decided we go by what the naked eye says. And therefore, even though they knew it, we go by naked eye, and that's why you can kill lice on Shabbos. I'm not comfortable with having to assume that Chazal knew science. I don't know why we have to say that. One of the same fellow who said to me that I was wrong, or that who berated me for saying Rabbeinu Tam was wrong, also holds that a very chashuv time chacham still alive today. He holds that Moshe Rabbeinu was given at Har Sinai quantum mechanics, and if you don't believe Moshe Rabbeinu was given quantum mechanics, which I have no idea what it is, at Har Sinai, you are a heretic, because Moshe Rabbeinu knew everything. And if he knew everything, he must know quantum mechanics. I don't think that's a sustainable position. I don't think it's necessary to say that. What do you think?
I don't know. That's an interesting thing I haven't thought about.
I think
But
he for sure knew quantum mechanics. Because he knew everything. Of course, he knew everything. By default, he had a meeting with God, and God taught him the Torah, the foundation of the world. So, of course he knew.
So then we have a very, very big problem with the Gemara Menachos. Very famous Gemara Menachos. The Gemara Menachos says that Moshe Rabbeinu came to Rabbi Akiva's drasha, Rabbi Akiva's shiur. You know the Gemara?
No.
Yeah. Heard of it.
Okay, so he came to Rabbi Akiva's shiur, and he was sitting in the back of the room, and he had no idea what was flying. Rabbi Akiva was expounding on Tagin, on the crowns which are on top of the letters in the Sefer Torah. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, what is going on here? I never heard of this before. And he said to Kosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, you have such a great person, why are you giving Torah through me? Give Torah through him. And the Gemara says, very interesting conclusion, when it says, Moshe Rabbeinu was very perturbed until something came up in shiur, and Rabbi Akiva said, we know this because Havlach Moshe Misina. At that point, Moshe was consoled. Now, that Gemara is a very, very difficult Gemara, requires a lot of analysis, but one point which Gemara is clearly making is that it's not true that Moshe Rabbeinu necessarily knew everything. Everything comes from the Torah which Moshe Rabbeinu was given. It's a difference, right? Moshe Rabbeinu was given the Torah with all the crowns. Moshe Rabbeinu had no idea why he was doing the crowns. He didn't have to know. He knew all the Torah, he knew everything he had to know anyway. But Moshe Rabbeinu was not consciously aware, according to the simple Pshat in the Gemara, of everything which is contained in Torah. It all came through him. You understand what I'm saying?
A little bit, yeah.
Does anybody understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yeah.
The saying about that approach, like the previous thing was asked, just like, I don't think it requires you to say that Chazal necessarily knew the science, because you have cases where Chazal was like basing their opinions on what they see, or like a rounded thing, which is not necessarily exact. You know, for Birkas Hachama, it's that one they knew for sure it wasn't based on the exact kufas, because they made that on purpose, right? Or for things like, for example, if you don't see certain creatures in the water, and you can eat it. They're not saying that they're not there. It's just if you can't see them, they're halachically insignificant, right? So I don't see why we can't say here that whether Chazal believed that was literally the science or not, you could say that the halacha is because it's based on like what human beings are able to know about. You know?
That may be, but let's take it back to our example. Let's take it to the dome.
Yeah.
Right? There is no dome, right?
Yeah.
So if there's no dome in heaven, at least the astronauts have not bumped into it yet.
Uh-huh.
So therefore, why is the halacha not changed? Why don't we say Rabbeinu Tam is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
So the answer is, again, that if we have an opinion in halacha, which is legislated legitimately based on normal channels, it becomes something which is halachically legitimate. And something which therefore can be taken into account, at least as a chumrah. Now I want to expand just before we have dozens and dozens of pages in the Gemara, and they're very, very difficult for Daf Yomi, when you have medications and medical procedures which are very obscure and very strange. I'm not sure you fulfill the mitzvah of learning Torah when you learn these medical blot in Shas with the various different medicines and procedures. Chazal didn't mean that Gemara should be only Torah. As a matter of fact, when we make the Birchas HaTorah in the morning, we don't mention the Gemara. We mention a set of psukim, Yirecha Hashem Yishmerecha, we mention a Mishnah and Peah, and we mention a Brisa. We don't mention a Gemara.
Okay, but you can't learn Mishnah without Gemara.
What?
You can't learn Mishnah without Gemara.
It doesn't matter, but it doesn't mean that everything in the Gemara correlates to a Mishnah, and therefore is part of the Torah of the Mishnah.
But like even things that are not, like we have a Gadata, they're all...
A Gadata is Torah. A Gadata is for sure Torah.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yes,
Like,
I'm talking about the medications now. You're trying to justify them?
I'm saying, I don't know what they literally mean, but I'm saying like just like a Gadata has a figurative meaning that is not literal.
Right, so that backs you into...
Torah concepts.
That backs you into very, very difficult corner, which I would not like to be backed into. Because that means that you're going to have to assume that every medication, which it says in the Gemara, has some sort of a mystical connotation to it, and not that it was folk medicine at the time. And that's very difficult to say.
Not necessarily. Like, I remember how, I think, this was an intro to Agadata, he said, like, Chazal was talking about Agadata. He was saying
this is not Agadata.
I understand, but I'm trying to bring out this concept that he's saying that they used metaphors from their contemporary science to bring out certain points, which, again, I really believe that it was the actual science, but the point is the metaphor, the lesson that's learned.
That works.
Not necessarily the actual science.
That works for me. I don't know about for you, but it works for me when we're talking about the four elements, right. about fire, wind, water, and dirt. Those four elements clearly are used by Chazal metaphorically and have a more profound connotation. But when it gets down to burning substances and making powders of them, that doesn't sound like it's something which has to do with a mystical thing. It has to do with and it may even work. Don't get me wrong. It may work, but those are medications based on science of the time. There's a radical approach by my person we love to quote here, Rabbi Victor Miller, who says that every medication worked at the time that it was being used. In other words, really Hashem doesn't need medications. Hashem sends the refuah based on his capacity to send the refuah, the healing, to a person who's suffering. But we need to have ishtadlus. We need to have a tool by which we make our efforts. So therefore, whatever the generation sees as its efforts are the efforts which work regardless of whether they actually are effective or not. So therefore, if bloodletting was considered to be a legitimate form of healing until the early 19th century, during all those years, bloodletting was a legitimate form of healing. And when they stopped believing in it in the early 19th century, it stopped being a legitimate form of healing. Okay? So it's an interesting perspective. I don't know if I buy it.
Bringing the placebo effect into this?
It's not. You can call it the placebo effect, but it's more radical than that.
Yeah.
That means that everything is a placebo. Exactly. There is no real medication, right? Chemotherapy, radiation therapy, everything is just the placebo of the time.
Interesting.
Yes, so that's a very radical approach, but one could hold that way. It certainly is a possible legitimate approach. And so then I don't doubt that. But I don't feel we need to say that. I think that we can say that anything which Chazal described based on science is based on the science which they knew, not the science that they didn't know. And I have evidence for this. I have evidence for this. And again, back to quantum mechanics. Okay? It's the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. I probably quoted this Gemara in the past here. Very famous Gemara. Gemara says that what is the origin of the holiday of Christmas? Previously called Saturnalia. It's that Adar Rishon, Saturnalia. It was a big Roman feast. So the Gemara says Adar Rishon sinned, according to this Gemara, in Tishrei, around September. And the days started getting shorter and shorter. And Adam Rishon became concerned. Maybe this is because of my sin, that the days are getting shorter and shorter, until finally, poof, the whole world will disappear in complete nighttime. And he kept on being worried and worried and more worried until December 25th, which is a few days after the solstice, which means at that point, he already perceived that the days were getting longer. And when he saw the days were getting longer, he said, this must be the way the world functions cyclically. It has nothing to do with my sin. This, by the way, goes against the Sforno and against Rabbi Miller, who say that the seasons do not exist prior to the Mabul, prior to the flood, and that the seasons only came about as a result of the flood. The Gemara Avodah Zarah obviously holds that seasons existed from the very beginning.
What
Now,
do they base their view on?
was it Sforno basis view on? I'm not sure. But I guess he holds that it's Agarata, so if he has the right to give a different suggestion. So so we see that Adam Arishon, who's created by God and given profound secrets of creation by God, how to do many, many things, including understanding the most profound natures of animals and never being able to name them based on their essences, was not given basic astronomy. He wasn't told their cycles. Their days get longer and their days get shorter. So if that's the case, we see that even Adam Rishon was not given scientific knowledge. There's no reason to assume that Moshe Rabbeinu was given scientific knowledge. Scientific knowledge evolves over time, independent of whether whether Chazal knew about it, and independent of Torah. And that's an important point to make. The Torah's system, halachic system, stands on its own like any good legal system. It's not something which is contingent on scientific knowledge, because then it was subject to constant change. On the contrary, what happens with Torah is, and the Ishbitzer speaks about it in this past week's parsha, is that Torah is something which is applicable to each and every new scientific development as it occurs. In other words, Torah doesn't change, the application of Torah changes. And that creates new Torah. So for example, when they came up with the refrigerator, so Torah principles were applied to refrigerators. The halacha didn't change. The halacha was applied. Science changed, but halacha doesn't change. That which is legislated, either midoraisa, in which case it cannot be changed at all, or mirabban, in which case there's a very cumbersome process, but it can be changed. This remains the halacha regardless of whether you have a scientific challenge to it or not. By the way, there's a difference, of course, between halacha and a legislative system in Dina and the Malchus Dina. In other words, if anybody here drives and has gone down the Palisades Parkway, you have broken the law, because nobody here goes on the Palisades Parkway at 55 miles an hour. Everybody goes down Palisades Parkway at 65 to 70 miles an hour.
What?
Yeah, except people have been in motorcycle accidents. They adhere to the speed limit. So do they?
Of course they do, Rabbi.
Of course. Okay. So the question is, why are you not breaking a law? Why don't you have to do intense tshuva every time you go down the Palisades Parkway? Have you ever thought of this issue?
Because it's a chilul Hashem.
What?
Not about other stuff.
No.
It's not about other stuff?
It's
Not about this?
No.
It'd be a chilul Hashem if you did.
To do tshuva would be a chilul Hashem?
No. If you're not going the speed everyone else is speeding, you know, you're going to cause a big problem, especially if you got like some Jewish bumper stickers on the back of your car.
Okay, so it's going to cause chilul Hashem to go too slowly. I hear it. Makes sense. So the thing is like this. Let me just finish this thought. That secular law does depend on what's enforced and what's not enforced. Rabbi Heinemann years ago, I think, went to the police and asked them, at what point do they become strict and enforce the speed limit? And they said 10% over the speed limit. I'm sure that fluctuates. Sometimes it's 10%, 10 miles, whatever the case may be. But until that point, you are not a scofflaw. It's possible that even past that, there are ways of understanding you're not a scofflaw and not transgressing an avera. But the point is that in the non-Jewish legal codes, it's not what it says on the books, but it's what you can get away with. Now, this changes from time to time. Of course, obviously the things which once you get away with, then you can't, and vice versa. But Judaism, halacha is not like that. In halacha, the legal code is the legal code. Yes?
So, according to this approach, the science and halacha that you said previously, let's say we're talking about halachic opinions that are like after the closing of the Gemara, right? So.
Which Rabbeinu Tam seems may well be, yeah.
Right, but here is not something that was legislated by Sanhedrin, nor something that was accepted by Klal Yisrael.
Right.
So then, why aren't we saying then that we should prefer the opinion, if there's multiple opinions around, we should prefer the opinion that's more concurrent with science?
It's a good question. So the point is that because we have these principles which we are made up ourselves, that Amoraim don't argue on Tanoim, Rishonim don't argue on Amoraim, Achronim don't argue on Rishonim. So therefore, if a Rishon says something, and this also has Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, why did anybody put on Rabbeinu Tam tefillin? It's absurd. One day Rabbeinu Tam came along and said, I know, I have a better idea for tefillin. Right? Till then everyone was putting on Rashi tefillin.
Is that true?
Yes, yes.
Other opinions?
No.
No?
Well, it comes to me, they say they found a Messiah, Rabbeinu Tam tefillin, but nobody put Rabbeinu Tam tefillin. Long as Rabbeinu Tam says, I have a good idea. I have a better idea, perhaps. But, so the point is, because Rabbeinu Tam is Rabbeinu Tam, he gets away with it.
But that's not like, that's true until Amoraim, like until...
No! That's what you think.
It's not like a halacha.
Wrong. Right? That's the point. In other words, until the Shulchan Aruch, it takes place. The Shulchan Aruch for us, so far, is the final demarcation line.
Because it was accepted.
Right. Last universally accepted thing.
But anything after that?
Anything after that may not be. That's correct. But obviously there are many things where Klal Yisrael, Chen Rabbeinu Gershom, right?
Yeah.
Chen Rabbeinu Gershom, as you know, Chen Rabbeinu Gershom means you're not allowed to marry, if you're an Ashkenazi, you're not allowed to marry two wives. The Sephardim did not accept that. They still allow themselves to marry two wives, but they did accept one of the other Chen Rabbeinu Gershoms, which is reading other people's mails. Sephardim were not okay at having a limit on how many wives they can take, but they were okay at preventing other people from reading their mail. Priorities are priorities. So Chen Rabbeinu Gershom.
So al pi halacha, it would be okay before this Chen?
Yeah. Yes. So this a question is why it was okay. What changed? Yes. So it's the whole question. This is another shiur. It's one of my favorite shiurim. But the other question is whether Rabbeinu Gershom invented the idea of intellectual property. I think he did. I think there was no concept of intellectual property before Rabbeinu Gershom. Yeah, that's my own.
When was he around?
He was in the 1000s. He was a Rashi's Rebbe's Rebbe. Okay, so that's my own understanding of this law. So that was something which, again, after the period of the Gemara, became universally accepted and therefore became part of that code. We have this idea of legislation which doesn't have to go through Sanhedrin but goes through universal acceptance. But again, once that becomes the standard, it becomes a standard irrespective of whatever original intent it was. It's fascinating because the Chen Rabbeinu Gershom, we don't know why he forbade taking two wives. There was a fellow, an author, one of my favorite authors when I was a kid. Could be, but there was one of the favorite authors from my childhood was a fellow by the name Rabbi Marcus Lehman. Rabbi Marcus Lehman was a rabbi in Germany, more or less contemporary, and have a similar theological perspective to Reb Sham Shmuel Hirsch. And he wrote novels. And one of the novels he wrote, I took all his novels he wrote as being real. Silly me. There are novels. For example, he has a whole novel about the Count of Kutsi. Kutsi, I don't know if that's correct pronunciation. Kutsi, in France, because there's a typo in several places in Tosfos, in Shas. But instead of saying Reb Shimon of Kutsi, the Rash of Kutsi, it says the Sar of Kutsi, right? Let's say Rabbeinu Shlomo, the abbreviation which would have been Shlomo Rabbeinu. And he made up a whole novelette about how there was one of the authors of the Tosfos who was a count in that town. And he also made up a whole novelette about why Rabbeinu Gershom Gola decided people should not have two wives. Had to do with the intrigue between two wives that he had. So this is something which again, I took this when I was 8, 9, whatever, 10 years old when I read it as being true, but it's not. It's just a nice story made up around the halacha. So we don't know why Rabbeinu Gershom did this, and therefore we can't change it. Now this leads me into another related issue, which is something where there was a big controversy back in the 1960s in America between Rabbi Emmanuel Rackerman, and Rabbi Soloveitchik of Boston. Rabbi Rachman wanted to come up with a chiddush, with a new idea. He said, the Gemara says that you cannot be mezakeh a get to a woman. You cannot say a man can't say, accept this get on behalf of my wife, even though she didn't appoint you to be an agent, because it's a schus, she really wants to be divorced. And we have a principle of zakin odam, zanam shlovafarab. You can do something which is advantageous for a person, even if the person is not present, even if he hasn't appointed an agent. So therefore, if I wanted to say, take my pen, give my pen as a gift to Reuven, I could say to Shimon, accept it on behalf of Reuven. It becomes Reuven's, even though Reuven is unaware of this transaction altogether. So Rabbi Rachman wanted to say that, I should go backtrack a little bit. The Gemara says, we don't allow that. We don't say you can be mezaka a get to a woman. Why? Because there's a principle, the Gemara says, tav l'mesav tandu mi l'mesav armulu. Any woman in the world would rather be married than single, even if her husband is a royal jerk and a bad person. That's the principle. Women would rather be married than be single.
You're firing up the feminist here.
So, be patient. So Rabbi Rachman said no longer applies. Many women would rather, maybe back then when they wouldn't have an alternative source of income, or when women were desperate to have the protection of a man. So then it would have been true that women would not have wanted to be divorced under any circumstances. But today, there are many women who would much rather be divorced than married to jerks.
They just all happen to be crazy, but yeah.
What? Okay. So he said today it's quite possible that we can say that halacha is that you can be mezaka get, provide a get to a woman even without her authorizing the agency. So Rabbi Soloveitch came along and said he regrets that Rabbi Rachman became a little bit apikores. Because he said, if Chazal make what we call an umdana, an assessment of human nature, so then that assessment of human nature is also halacha, and also has the status of law, and therefore to say that it changed is considered is like undermining the authority of Chazal. In other words, not just our halacha is eternal, but umdanos, assessments which Chazal make of human nature are also eternal. Now this is very powerful. This is a very radical position. Let me just give you the Beckhofer approach, and then we can talk about it. So the Beckhofer approach is that, like neither of them. The Beckhofer approach is that, in fact, the umdanas can change over time. It may well be that women today would rather be divorced than married to jerks. But since we don't know how Chazal made that assessment, we have no way of reassessing, reevaluating, and undermining the original assessment. In other words, we don't have the tools. It's possible that if Chazal had said, okay, this is how we did it, we took a Gallup poll of all the women in a certain location, and took so then we could redo it. We could do that, but we don't know how Chazal did it. So therefore, if you don't know how Chazal did it, yes, in theory, Rabbi Rachman is correct. It could change. In practice, Rabbi Soloveitch is right. We cannot change it. But not because the umdana, again, they assessed human nature. Human nature can change. We don't know if it changed or not. Yes?
I was going to say that this sounds like this is like an even stronger case than the science thing in terms of with science we can say that Chazal didn't have but with human nature it's like things that people naturally see all the time. So you can say that they didn't have access to scientific method or whatever, but they had access to human interactions. I think it's much clearer there that we can say that Chazal is right. People don't change that much in terms of their innate nature, I would say.
You might be right. I have no idea whether you're right or not. You just made a very bold assertion.
I suppose it is.
Yeah.
What?
I suppose it is.
Yes.
He lives his life by that assertion, by the way.
That human nature doesn't change?
Oh yeah. Pretty
Okay. No, it's true that people don't change very much. I say this all the time. The Slanter was that it's harder to change to change one meter than to learn all of Shas. And I can tell you that so far in counting, it's harder to change one meter than learn Shas 7 times and Bavli and Yerushalmi 4 times. So it's
going to be a breeze for
what?
us Chuvas. It's going to be a breeze for us Chuvas.
Yes.
Then.
It is it's very difficult to change nature, but that doesn't mean nature doesn't change over time. And the truth is that to Rav Kook, writing before the Holocaust. So I don't know what he wrote after the Holocaust, and I certainly don't accept what he wrote. But he wrote that humanity, and I think Rabbi Shlomo had the same sense. Again, he died many years before the Holocaust, of course, 10 years before the Holocaust. But that humanity is evolving over time, becoming more refined and more of a higher moral character. Again, the Holocaust seems to have proven that to be incorrect. But there were those who theorized that human nature is changing over time and becoming more refined over time. Okay, so getting back to this. That's why Rabbeinu Tam's Shkia and Rabbeinu Tam's Tzeis are still issues in Halacha. Because Halacha deals with things independently of the scientific antecedents there too. And that's what Shlomo Zalman says, and this is something which for me was very difficult to accept the first time I saw this. Shlomo Zalman says in Eretz Yisrael, even in Eretz Yisrael, you should be machmir if you can to say Shachris in the morning according to the Zmanim of Magen Avraham. The Zmanim of Magen Avraham is based on Rabbeinu Tam. Maybe we'll explain it next week. And Magen Avraham's time is directly related to Rabbeinu Tam. And therefore, scientifically, it doesn't make any sense. And yet, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was a great scientist, literally, he knew technology, science, he knew much about it, more than we ever will. But nevertheless, he said, it's appropriate to be machmir. I'm not machmir. But it's appropriate to be machmir. Why? Because it's a legitimate approach in halacha. It's on the books, and therefore it counts. Okay, Rabbi Isai, we'll stop here for this week. On tape, Ron? No,
on tape, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I was trying to consolidate this with, science, right? And I came up with this idea. What the dome he's talking about is the Earth's electromagnetic field.
It could be. What has a name, like the Van Allen belt or something like that?
Something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know how. So the sun goes.
No,
it's very different because it is porous.
It is porous. It has there's a whole bunch of it seemed to kind of match up a little bit.
It does. You can come up with a lot of theories, and if you come up with a good one, I'll be very impressed, and I will put it on tape. I'll put it on my blog. But in the meantime, we have to refine it.
Okay.
The thing is that the way Chazal came up with this idea of the dome has to do not just with ancient astronomy, but which held that there was a sphere in the sky, but also has to do with the shot in the word rakia. This goes into the idea, what does rakia mean on the second day of creation?
What does it mean?
What?
It means filament?
Firmament. What does firmament mean? So
know.
the Yerushalmi says it means a dome.
A dome.
Yeah.
Yerushalmi says it.
Yep.
Well, but there's other rabbis that, going back to quantum mechanics, that the firmament is talking about the fabric of space-time.
Yes, it doesn't. Again, if according to the Beckhoff approach, the fact that the Yerushalmi says it's a dome, it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to halacha. That was the scientific knowledge of the time. That's how they understood the pasuk. We would understand pasuk differently.
But it just seems to me that there are certain correlations in modern science today. There are still current correlations to all these.
Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's one of his major works and major approaches was to show how the Torah does sync up with modern science. Okay, which is fine, but that's we have to understand. If modern science 50 years from now is overturned in some sort of upheaval we cannot perceive, Torah doesn't change. It was nice that it worked out. If it doesn't work out anymore, okay, it doesn't work out anymore. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
I do.
Okay.